evening, Admiral Carter and distinguished guests and members of the class of 2017. My name is Colonel Art Athens. I have the honor and privilege of serving as the director of the Vice Admiral James B. Stockdale Center for Ethical Leadership here at the Naval Academy. And it's my privilege to welcome you to the 2014 Moral Courage Lecture that is made possible by the generous support of the class of 1964. And I'd like to ask the members of the class of 1964 to stand and be recognized for your support of this evening. The purpose of the Moral Courage Lecture is to provide us with an opportunity to reflect on the unremitting responsibility we have as professional officers to demonstrate moral courage every day in every situation, to do what is right no matter the cost. And I'm honored to introduce our guest speaker tonight, someone who examples that type of life, to do the right thing no matter what it costs. An incredible leader and someone with unwavering moral courage from whom we have much to learn. Travis Tygart is the Chief Executive Officer for the United States Anti-Doping Agency, the USADA. I could provide many details of this remarkable man's life, to include his passionate advocacy for the integrity of sport and clean athletes through his writing, speaking, and investigatory work, as well as his recognition by Sports Illustrated as one of the 50 most powerful people in sports. But I can do no better than to share with you the words that Dick Pound, the former chairman of the World Anti-Doping Agency and a member of the International Olympic Committee, once wrote about Mr. Tygart for Time magazine, when Mr. Tygart was selected by Time as one of the 100 most influential people in the world. This is what he said about Travis Tygart. "The measure of a man who does his duty is not what others think of him, but his own commitment to doing what is right. Travis Tygart heads an organization dedicated to protecting athletes who play fair from those who do not. No one would argue with the philosophy of doping-free sport, but few are willing to undertake the demanding work of identifying cheaters and imposing sanctions upon them. Proving what many already suspected about Lance Armstrong, in particular, was especially challenging, given the relentless media and legal tactics organized by Armstrong and his team, which were increasingly directed at Mr. Tygart personally. Some wilt under such circumstances, others become even more determined not to succumb. Tygart's work was so thorough that once the courts predictably dismissed Armstrong's challenges, he had no alternative but to face the music. Armstrong folded and later confessed that he had in fact doped for many years, just as the USADA and Tygart had charged. He got what he deserved, stripped of the Tour de France wins, a lifetime ban, and the disgrace of having cheated other athletes and those who believed in his achievements. Mr. Pound concluded his write-up by saying, "Score one for the good guys." We are very honored to have Mr. Tygart with us this evening, and before I bring him up, I'd like to show a brief clip that comes from 60 Minutes about this particular incident, and then Mr. Tygart will come up to the stage.
Armstrong admitted to doping for the first time in an interview with Oprah Winfrey last week. But the director of the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency, Travis Tygart, told us that Armstrong did not tell the truth in that interview and left out the most important facts that investigators want to nail down. Tygart is the official who pursued the Armstrong investigation when others had given up. The evidence amassed by his anti-doping agency forced Armstrong to surrender his titles, lose his sponsors, and quit his charity. Armstrong says he wants to return to sport. Travis Tygart holds the keys to that decision. So we asked him this week about Armstrong's talk show confession.
You know, at one point in the interview, he said that he was curious about the definition of the word cheater, and he looked it up in the dictionary and didn't think it necessarily applied to him.
It's amazing. I mean, Scott, you could go to almost any kindergarten in this country, or frankly around the world, and find kids playing tag or foursquare and ask them what cheating is. And every one of them will tell you it's breaking the rules of the game. No real athlete has to look up the definition of cheating.
The famous U.S. Postal team was fueled by dope. There was an illegal blood booster called EPO. There was testosterone and a banned technique called blood doping, in which riders store fresh blood and transfuse it into their bodies during a race. Records were broken, victories spoke for themselves, and for a decade, no one spoke of anything else. In 2010, the U.S. Department of Justice opened a criminal investigation. Armstrong's teammates were forced to testify, subpoenaed by a grand jury. The grand jury heard from at least a dozen postal riders. There was testimony that a team bus had been pulled over in France while the riders inside were hooked up to banned blood transfusions. Some testified that riders used makeup to cover needle marks. The secret grand jury proceeding went on for 2 years, but in 2012, the U.S. attorney dropped the case without explanation. USADA had been monitoring the investigation, and Tygart thought that the evidence gathered by the U.S. attorney was overwhelming. Armstrong congratulated the government for closing the investigation and kept repeating what he told CBS Sports in 2005.
Explain to me how we've passed so many tests if we're so dirty. And they don't want to answer that question. And that's not fair.
But Tygart did want to answer that question, and he began an investigation. He convinced riders to testify to USADA. He looked at Armstrong's tests from his first Tour de France victory in 1999 and found EPO. Tygart's agency was also threatened. The CEO of the Livestrong Foundation, Armstrong's cancer charity, lobbied against USADA before Congress. Members of Congress and 23 California state representatives called for an investigation of the agency's practices and its taxpayer funding. Last year, when Tygart made his evidence public, Armstrong had the option of a hearing and confronting the witnesses, but he chose not to fight. If Lance Armstrong had prevailed in this case and you had failed, what would the effect on sport have been?
It would have been huge, because athletes would have known that some are too big to fail.
And the message that sends is what?
Cheat your way to the top. And if you get too big and too popular and too powerful, if you do it that well, you'll never be held accountable.
Ladies and gentlemen, Travis Tygart.
Thanks, Art. Appreciate it. Thank you. Good evening. All right, come on, Naval Academy. That was kind of weak. Let's do it one more time. Ready? I'm going to say good evening, and then you say good evening back. Ready? Good evening. That's where we go. Thank you very much. Hey, I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. I couldn't be more excited, more inspired, quite honestly, to be here. Art, thank you for that wonderful, very generous introduction. I want to thank Admiral Carter as well for the invitation to be here. I couldn't be more excited. I tell you, I was here last year around this time and was fortunate enough to bring my two older kids, my daughter who was 11 at the time and my son who was 9 at the time. And they are diehard Navy fans. And remember, yeah, you can clap at that. You can clap at that. Remember, however, we live in Colorado Springs. So while it's Air Force Week here at the Naval Academy, it's Navy Academy Week at the Air Force, where our hometown is. So you know this place is special when two young kids, who all they see on TV, all they read about in the paper, is about the Air Force Falcons and how great its football team and basketball team is. And we live just south of the academy, and we see the jets flying by every home football game. And many times during the week, you know this place is special when you all have captured their hearts, and they're going to be cheering for you come Saturday. Absolutely. The only downside to coming to the academy that I've realized over the last 2 days since I've been here, and there's not much downside, In fact, it's mostly upside. Having gone to the gym this afternoon to work out, walking through the campus, seeing the various statutes, people of true leadership and true inspiration, how powerful this place is. The only downside that I think I've been able to come up with is being called sir way too many times over the past 2 days. And the class of 64, of course, is laughing because if you're not in the military and you're referred to as sir, that means you're old. So being referred to as sir the last 2 days has been the only downside. In all seriousness, I'm absolutely thrilled because you all are the leaders of this country, the most powerful economic engine the world has ever known, the most powerful military the world has ever known. You're going to go out from this academy and literally run the world, be the leaders of the world. And that is a huge responsibility, a huge power that's been given to you all. And it's only good if it's done for good. It only matters if it's done for good. And I think this story that you just saw a little clip of around the Lance Armstrong case is by far bigger of a story than just one single Tour de France winner. I'm going to talk a little bit about that case, but I hope you'll hear the messages of ethics and moral leadership and courage and what it takes to do the right thing even when it's tough to do. And how easy in this world it is to succumb to the temptations to win at all costs and to justify doing the wrong thing. We can so easily justify in our culture today taking the shortcut if it gets us ahead. Fraud, corruption have no place in a country that wants to do good. And hopefully you'll hear that in this story. You see the title is Competing Fair and Winning. Because I think at the end of this story, what we've seen from the riders in the pro peloton, that's the group of cyclists you see every Tour de France or other major competition, those that didn't succumb to the temptation to win at all costs, those who were true to the values as well as the rules of the sport and the law that applied in the countries where they were competing, even though on the short-term basis you might not know their names, maybe they didn't win the $30, $50 million that some others won, but at the end of the day, when the truth came out, they know, and they could look themselves in the mirror knowing that they did it the right way, and they still today firmly believe that competing fair is the only way to truly win. Now, students, you're going to face it, and I'm sure you've already faced it. Competitive high schools where you went, competitive classrooms, whether you play sports or you don't play sports, you see these headlines. All of them are non-sport headlines, but they touch right on the issue of what are you going to do when you're confronted with an ethical decision that in the short term might pay you, might give you a reward, but it's against the rules. It's against your ethics. It's against the mission that you signed up for. What are you going to do? And I think you want to prepare yourself and be prepared. And that ethical question is no different than the ethical questions that Lance Armstrong, his teammates, but the 2,500 athletes that fall under our testing jurisdiction make every day. The decision to play fair, to play by the rules, at the heart is an ethical decision. We've agreed to play this sport. And you know what? The 100-meter dash is 100 meters for all competitors. Some competitors don't run a 50-meter dash against others who are running a 100-meter dash. That's the rules of the competition. How unfair would it be if, the Air Force Academy got to play 5 downs a series instead of 4 against the Navy who only got 4 downs a series? You might argue that you might still beat them. Maybe they get a 50-point lead. That's what it might take, right? Point being, the rules that all competitors have agreed to are critically important for the fairness of the game. And all athletes in our world have agreed to abide by these rules. So the question becomes, what's the mission? You see on the screen a couple of slides, but you see mission. Preserve, inspire, protect. So at USADA, our mission is to preserve the integrity of competition, inspire true sport, and protect the rights of clean athletes. And you want to know what your mission is before you get in the dogfight. If you're in the fight, and you're going to hear a little bit about the Lance Armstrong case, but if we were trying to figure out during that case what we were supposed to be doing, it would have been way too easy to justify doing the wrong thing. And we wouldn't know what is guiding us. What are the principles that are guiding us in our decision making when we're confronted with a difficult situation? And fortunately, our board, which is a 10-person board, we're a not-for-profit organization. We're not a government agency. We get private funding as well as some money from the government and funding. But our board, fortunately, outside of the crisis time, had put together its mission and its vision. And so we knew when confronted with the difficult decisions, nobody in their right mind would want to bring a case of doping against Lance Armstrong. We had posters of Lance Armstrong in our office. It was a tough, difficult day when all this evidence showed up of his cheating, of his doping, showed up at our office and forced us to make a decision. Are we going to fulfill the mission that we agreed to? Or are we going to somehow justify doing the wrong thing and sticking the file in a drawer and never worrying about it again? And I can assure you, that would have been a heck of a lot easier, which you'll soon find out. So having that mission before you get into the battle is critically important. And believing in that mission and dedicating yourself and committing yourself, as well as surrounding yourself with people both above you, but also around you and next to you that also buy into that mission. And creating a culture where anything but loyalty and adhering to that mission is unacceptable. You see, education is critically important to what we do. Testing, obviously, is critically important to what we do. And testing really is a preventative measure. You see, and I'm happy to answer some questions at the Q&A about the NFL. They just signed an agreement to add human growth hormone testing to their testing program. You see some urine kits. That's actually a blood kit. We do both blood and urine. We've got about 2,500 athletes around the country who are the elite of the elite in the Olympic level. So names that you've heard: Michael Phelps, Misty Franklin, Lance Armstrong, all the way down to, you know, some weekend warriors who just happen to be the best table tennis players in the country, literally fall under our testing jurisdiction. But each and every one of them want the rules to be enforced because their right to compete on a level playing field is really important. And if they went into a competition and all of their hard work, all of their training, paying attention to their diet, all of their exercise, if that was not what determined the outcome of the match, but it was some drugs in violation of the rule that someone else used, that would be totally unfair. And so they look to us through testing, through education, in order to protect their rights. Just one kind of funny example of the win at all costs and the pressures that it puts on athletes who are out in the playing field. Some of you may know this story, but this is Shaun King, and all this is public. But Shaun King, a former quarterback for the Carolina Panthers, and the NFL's program is not as robust, quite candidly, as it should be from a testing standpoint. But here's an example where Shaun King was told he was going to be tested. He would actually get a phone call under the NFL program. And he got a phone call, but what Shaun King did in order to ensure he didn't have a positive test, so he didn't get caught under the program for using the drugs that he was using to enhance his performance, he would have stored urine available for him. And he didn't, buy it on the internet like you can today, but he got his girlfriend to provide him, or a woman friend that he knew, to buy him or to provide him clean stored urine. Well, on this particular occasion, when the NFL called and said, hey, we're going to come by and drug test you in 2 days, you better be ready. Well, he ran out of this, the clean urine, so he got it from this girlfriend of his. And while he passed the test, unfortunately, he failed it because he came up pregnant. Point being, the extent athletes will go to, the extent we will go to avoid being detected, being caught, is pretty extreme. We also provide research funds at the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency through partnerships with Major League Baseball, the National Football League, and the United States Olympic Committee. Actually, we just hired a Naval Academy grad to be the new executive director of this research partnership. And in large part, the reason they were hired is what they learned here. The leadership traits this young graduate immediately was able to bring to this not-for-profit entity that has a $3+ million budget to give research to scientific development. Accountability.
People are going to say if you hadn't been caught, you'd still be doing it.
I would have to say yes, but that's not what happened. I got caught. So I did what was the right thing to do. So yes, would I be doing it if I didn't get caught? I'd still be doing it. I'm here to say the truth, so that is the
accountability. What has to go hand in hand in our world with education, with research, with the testing, is accountability. And the ability to hold someone if they do violate the rules. And that's the hard part of the job. And the cultures that you're going to lead, you also have to have accountability in place. And sometimes there's tough decisions. You heard, this is Tony Bosch. Some of you may have seen this episode on 60 Minutes that ran earlier this year. But he was the drug dealer, performance-enhancing drugs that fed almost 20 Major League Baseball players, including Alex Rodriguez. And after this interview, a lot of people were upset because what did he say? Well, if I hadn't gotten caught, I would have continued on the path that I was on. Now, he did get caught, as did those athletes, and they were suspended and sanctioned. And now he is trying to right the wrongs that he did. So there is always an opportunity, right, for forgiveness and redemption in these situations. But at the end of the day, from a leadership standpoint, that accountability is critically important. Because if you don't have accountability in place, those who are willing to violate the rules are going to do it and continue to do it until the point they get caught. That brings me to our cycling investigation. You see the subtitle here, Vision, Mission, and Values in Action, and I think that's what this portion of the talk, and hopefully there'll be questions around this at the end as well. But our investigation started in 2010 when a cyclist, some of you may know the name, but Floyd Landis, came to us. He had a positive test in the 2006 Tour de France. He was the American winner after Lance Armstrong. Lance Armstrong's 7th was in 2005. And then the following year, the next American, Floyd Landis, won the Tour de France. Some of you may remember he had a positive test. Ultimately, that was referred to us here in the United States by virtue of the rules of international sport. So we ended up prosecuting or bringing forward or holding accountable Floyd Landis for violating the rules. You see the test results here. It was a TE ratio test, essentially way too much testosterone. You see on that one, if I can point it, you see on this one test, it was through the roof. And that's ultimately what we went forward on. And he was found to have committed a violation. Well, Floyd came forward and wanted to be truthful. And we told him two things. We're willing to listen. We had a choice. We could have not listened. We could have pushed him away. Again, I think as leaders, you want to hear from the people within your culture to know what's really going on. Because sometimes there's the ivory tower who sees it one way, but then there are people in the locker room who see it in an entirely different way. You hear the NFL right now being criticized for that. Like what's really happening in the locker room, the commissioner's office out in New York has no idea because they don't want to listen to what's going on there. So listening to people on the front lines as leaders is critically important when shaping your culture. So we listened to Floyd when he came forward, and we said, look, we have two requirements. Number one, you have to be truthful. Whatever you tell us, it has to be the truth. And number two, you can't just tell us about the people that you don't like who are still in the sport, and you can't hide information from us about people you do like. Pretty fair, pretty open, pretty honest. We sat down with him and had an authentic conversation. And unfortunately, he told us about a pervasive drug culture within the sport of cycling, and unfortunately within America's greatest team and greatest athlete in the Tour de France, Lance Armstrong and the US Postal Service's team. Shortly after we heard from Floyd, one of the athletes that he talked to us about was this guy that you see on the screen, Dave Zabriskie. Dave Zabriskie, unfortunately, grew up in a very dysfunctional home. His dad sold drugs out of his home, died as a result of the drug trade. Dave Zabriskie, as a young kid, used cycling, used sport to escape a terrible home life and make himself better through sport. He forewent college. He got talked out of going to college, but instead to pursue his dream to be a professional cyclist. And what happened when he got to the professional level, at the moment he had reached the dream that he used to escape the drug culture of his family life, is he got confronted by the team manager, the general manager essentially of the US Postal Service's team, as well as the team doctor and the team trainer. And they all put pressure on him and said, if you want to stay on this team, if you want to earn your money, here are the drugs you're going to have to use in order to perform. An incredible story of influence and where leaders of the culture went wrong. And essentially coerced, persuaded. Yes, Dave made his own decisions, but the pressure that was put on them to do the wrong thing and become a fraud in violation of the rules and the laws where they were competing was incredible. So when we heard this evidence and saw it, like I said, it was the worst day you can possibly imagine if you're in our position. American icon, global hero, best team cycling the world has ever known, won 7 Tour de France's in a row. Many of the people were still in the sport. We had decisions to make. And you see here 1 pursuit, 2 goals, and 3 fronts. Well, our 1 pursuit was the truth. Going back to the mission that we have to preserve, inspire, and protect, what is the truth? Whether Lance Armstrong or anyone else on that team doped, we didn't care. We just wanted the truth. And we were determined to pursue the truth, as is our mission. Here's a letter you see that was written by our general counsel, Bill Bach, to Lance Armstrong's attorneys. We actually were hopeful that Lance Armstrong, when the evidence was amassed, given the breadth and the depth of it, and what it clearly showed, we were hopeful that he was going to come in and be part of the solution to helping us clean up the dirty culture of cycling. And unfortunately, he decided not to do that. You see a letter in response. And this was after about a 10-day period where we had numerous phone calls and a couple exchanges of letters. But they made it clear. He's not going to come in. He's clean. He hasn't doped. And I think, importantly, once you take that first step down the path of deceit or fraud, you break the ethic that you've agreed to abide by. It gets a lot easier each subsequent step, but it also gets a lot harder to turn back. And guys, that's a really important point, I think, that comes out of this story. And all the athletes who did come forward and tell us about the truth that was going on made that point over and over. It got so hard to eventually be truthful. But quite honestly, even at this point, when we gave Lance the chance to come in, the world would have forgiven him, and rightfully so. Guy has done a whole lot of good in a lot of areas. He participated in a culture that easily justified it. It's still wrong. He still would have been held accountable, but he would have had a second opportunity. Still does today, of course, but it gets a lot more difficult the farther away you are from that opportunity. So that was our pursuit. We had 2 goals. Goal number 1 was, if you remember, this happened during the summer of 2012. And our U.S. Olympic team, the greatest athletes in the U.S. who represent the U.S., our country, in the Olympics were being brought together. And we knew 3 or 4 of the riders, the cyclists, who were the best in the country. Dave Zabriskie, one of the pictures you just saw, George Hincapie, Christian Vandevelde, Tom Danielson. If you follow the sport of cycling, these are top names that you all know. They would have made the U.S. Olympic team, gone to London, and won medals. And yet we had evidence that they had no business doing that if the rules were enforced. They had cheated in the past with these drugs. And as a result, they were going to go win medals. And that would have been inherently unfair to all the other athletes on the team, because all the world would have remembered were the dirty cyclists from America that came over and won medals and whose medals had to be returned. So that was one of our immediate concerns. Although we also acknowledged that by bringing or holding accountable those athletes, that also necessarily meant Lance Armstrong and the other athletes on that team were also going to have to be held accountable if we were going to fairly and consistently move forward with the case. The second goal, and quite honestly the goal that we're still on today, was to dismantle the dirty system. And we literally use that term, dismantle the system. There were a lot of coaches. Here you see 5 faces. Coaches, this one's a team, this is a doctor. He's now been given a lifetime ban. So we had a number of coaches, doctors, all of whom were in the system that oversaw this culture, that allowed this drug use, condoned it, provided, sometimes paid for, and supported these athletes when they were trying to use these drugs, all knowing it was in violation of the rules. So our goal was to dismantle that system to ensure that no other young athlete in this country or any other who went into the sport was faced with that same untenable decision of, do I have to use these drugs, become a fraud, become corrupt, in order to meet and reach my athletic dream? That's not a choice any young athlete should have to make. And we knew unless we totally dismantled this system, this dirty culture of people that allowed this system to flourish, we were failing in our duty. We knew when we brought the case eventually, when Lance Armstrong refused to come in, we ultimately brought the case. He obviously had a detailed history of bullying people, of abusing his position to try to keep the truth quiet. And we knew we were in for a big fight. And again, that's the fight that you can't be trying to decide what your rules or your mission are, your ethics are at that point. Because it's too tough. It's too brutal for your staffs, for your team, for your family. You have to do it way before. And thank goodness in our case, thank goodness for clean athletes, we decided what our mission was well before we got into this fight, because it was an incredible fight. We've defined this fight as 3 fronts. The first front you see here is the media front, both traditional media as well as social media. I'm going to talk just a little bit about. You see Marion Jones, and her picture's up there because Marion Jones, great Olympian, had 5 medals revoked for her cheating as well during the 2000 Sydney Olympic Games. Lance's people hired the same PR legal counsel that Marion Jones had and borrowed the same playbook, which was essentially lie, deny, and attack those who were simply doing their job by holding the athletes accountable to fair competition. So we knew to a certain extent where they were going to go from a media perspective. And believe me, they put as much pressure on the media. Just Google a little bit of it and you'll see as much pressure as you possibly can imagine on our entity, on our staff, on our funding. The stated goal by them was to try to bankrupt us. And they used every trick in the book in order to bankrupt us. You see a really, some might call it clever, some might call it evil. Either way, it was overly effective at putting pressure on us to dismiss or not go forward with the case, despite how overwhelming the evidence was. And make no mistake, look, he's admitted it all now, but there was never, when you saw the evidence and you're sitting in our position with our mission, there was never any doubt of what the evidence proved. But here you see a tweet. And look, the NFL's learning this lesson pretty hard right now. In today's social world, with the power of the media, one little tweet, one little video from an elevator can dismantle large organizations. And I think it's a great lesson. It's a lesson we learned, which is nothing's in the dark anymore with social media. It's all coming out to light. So if your company, your culture is based on something other than what you say it is, it's ultimately going to come out. And I think you got to be smart enough to prepare for that and make sure that there is nothing in the dark that's going to come out to damage who you are and the culture that you're trying to set. But Armstrong's team was as good as anybody at using Twitter to spark very emotional. Here you see words like unconstitutional. USADA's, U.S. Anti-Doping's latest witch hunt. You know, Twitter's what, 100, you guys would know, 140 characters or whatever it is. It's not, you know, briefs and facts. It's just emotional words, sometimes truthful, sometimes not, but get attached to emotions. And there's an emotional response, particularly in this country, to words like witch hunt and unconstitutional. And these are the things that we were being accused of. And, you know, Lance had, 3+ million followers. Here's another one. And frequently you would see press statements during this time period, again, summer of 2012, showing up. Here's the Washington Post. You remember me earlier saying their stated goal was to bankrupt us? Well, we get part of our money, about $8.75 million, from the United States government. It's a grant. We're not a government agency, but we do have a funding mechanism through the government. And they were planning these stories first out, first run in the Washington Post, because that's where it had the most impact to do the most damage to us when we're up on the Hill trying to obtain the funding that we need to survive. The other reason the Washington Post became the go-to source is because Sally Jenkins, and here's just an example of a headline. Sally Jenkins is one of the top sports columnists for the Washington Post. And you see one of the first headlines, Lance Armstrong doping campaign exposes USADA's hypocrisy. So again, attack the process, attack the group that's trying to do the job that they're supposed to do. Well, it's not by chance that Sally Jenkins, supposedly one of the top sports columnists for the Washington Post, also was the co-author of 2 of Lance's books. So there's a big problem if that book, where there's denials throughout it of drug use, that she co-authored, suddenly the truth is exposed. So you see the power and the influence coming down on those just simply trying to do the right thing. Here's one, another example of using surrogates, others out there who may or may not know what's going on, but who are friends within that celebrity circle to take the mantle on whatever it is that is trying to hold them accountable. And here you see Matthew McConaughey, stop the investigation of the USADA at Lance Armstrong. And if you go to the link that's on Twitter, you'll see it's to a petition to strip the tax-funded status. So we're a not-for-profit. So they were going after, trying to strip our not-for-profit recognized tax status. This, by the way, from Matthew McConaughey is the one that finally got McConaughey off my wife's top 5 most loved actors. He only dropped to like 7. I don't know how that's possible, but that's what happened. Again, just to talk about the media pressure, here you see, and you heard this in the video that was played, Armstrong had the opportunity to contest the charges that we had brought and all the evidence. And we would have, in open court, brought up bit by bit, piece by piece, all the evidence. Well, on August 23rd, that was the day that he threw in the towel, essentially said, I'm going to exercise my right not to contest all the evidence that you have against me. And I'm just going to accept the lifetime ban. So you see there on August 23rd at 10:15 p.m., that was announced. The media world went crazy. And if I can get this to work, at 10:15, so literally less than 30 minutes later, at 10:40, our office and me personally get the first of several death threats. Specific and credible enough that we turned them over to the FBI. This one, 2 of them, but including this one, were both prosecuted for sending threatening emails over the wire service. Both pled guilty to felony counts and were sentenced this past year. So that's the media pressure that was put on us to do the wrong thing. The political pressure, you heard a little bit about it in the video, but here's just a couple examples. The Livestrong lobbyist, the same criminal defense attorneys that were representing Lance, you heard about that criminal case that closed, that were also representing him in the case that we brought against him. They also registered as lobbyists for the foundation and were up on the Hill lobbying heavily against us. I went to the Hill about 4 times that summer. Here's one actually where Twitter came to our rescue, if you want to call it that. Here's a guy, Race Radio. One of the congressmen that was putting a lot of pressure on us, who had sent a nasty letter to the press about us, but also introduced later legislation attempting to curb our processes, was Sensenbrenner. Well, Sensenbrenner, turned out, lived in the same district as the bike company that sponsored the US Postal Service's team, Trek. And the Twitter world found this out, and Twitter lit up with the fact that the congressmen who had put pressure on us and introduced legislation against us also lived and represented the district where the bike company, and what was reported was that a heavy donation was made to the re-election PAC of that particular politician. You see the power, the influence. Fortunately, Naval Academy grad, Senator John McCain, I'm sure you all know, did put out a statement in support. And again, not taking position in the case, whether these facts lead to this conclusion or not, but had the courage to put out about the process. And let's trust this process. And fortunately, McCain was one that we had worked with previously, and he was fully aware of what our mission was, what our purpose was, and absolutely agreed that where the facts rise to the level under your mission, then you have to go forward with the case. And it was nice to get some political coverage, so to speak, from the senior member of the party. And again, it's not a political statement, Republican, Democrat, it's just the fact that someone had adhered to the process and was willing to do it. We also got an incredible amount of pressure from sport. The very sport itself, you can see, here's a quote by the president of the sport at the time. This was when I mentioned Floyd Landis. I also, I think, mentioned Tyler Hamilton, another one of the witnesses that came forward. When they came forward, here's what the president of the sport of cycling said about them when they came forward. Remember what I said about creating a culture where people can be truthful to the leaders of that culture, and that the leaders are going to listen and are going to make a decision based on fact about what's best for that culture going forward. When these two guys came out, the two riders, and were truthful about what was really going on, this is the response their president gave them. They're nothing but scumbags. All they've done is damage the sport. It's a great lesson for leaders. The most important lesson, this guy lost his job. The head of the sport, last September, because of his reaction and his oversight, his failure to create a clean, corrupt-free culture within the sport, he lost his job. He was held accountable and lost his job. That's a great outcome for those who are playing by the rules and ethically. Armstrong, and I'm going to move through this pretty quick, but Armstrong also sued us. Fortunately, a federal court dismissed the case. Importantly found, any future lawyers out there, importantly found that constitutional due process was afforded to Lance Armstrong and every other athlete, coach, other person in our process. So our rules provide constitutional due process before you're removed from competition. You see, here's an EPO gel. You heard in the video, 60 Minutes clip about EPO and their use of EPO. This was a sample that was collected in '99, that was later retested in 2004 and 2005, positive for EPO. And this is, there's a whole chemical process behind it. So IEF separates the proteins based on their acidity and their base levels by electrically charging it. And the synthetic EPO moves to one portion of the electropharogram. And what you see here is, in layman's term, it's the most positive EPO we've ever seen. It was 100%, any scientist in the room, 100% basic area percentage, meaning the only EPO, we all produce EPO naturally, but when you use synthetic EPO, the drug, it shuts off your body's own natural production of EPO. And all that is in this sample, it was reported as 100% basic area percentage, meaning 100% synthetic EPO. Armstrong's natural EPO production had entirely shut off because of his use of the amount of drug of EPO that he was using. Here, and we talked briefly about this at dinner, but here's another just glimpse of some of the evidence that was used. These are blood values, and this is hemoglobin and reticulocytes. Hemoglobin tracks hematocrit, was basically the amount of red blood cells you have in your body at any given time. And you can see these were different blood tests over a period of time. It's called a longitudinal analysis. And if you follow anti-doping or drug use in sport, this is the future, which basically tracks a person's values. So it's not looking specifically for drugs, but it's looking at various markers that we all have and how they're influenced. And so that up and down is absolutely unnatural and doesn't happen. And the expert testimony was this up and down, particularly during these races, 1 in a million chance was due to anything other than blood doping. Blood transfusions you heard about in the video. We also had other eyewitnesses and documentary evidence that went along with that. The most powerful evidence, but also the most tragic, were the stories that we heard of all the eyewitnesses that came in. You see the faces here, some of the top and the top U.S. American riders, about 11 of them at that point. We now have had over 20 plus who have come in. But 11 of them came in, and they were given the opportunity to be truthful. And in a way, they were almost victims. I mean, make no mistake, not everyone in this culture did what these guys did. A lot of people left the sport. There were a lot of people that stayed in the sport that didn't use the drugs that never had the success that some of these guys did. But when given the opportunity, and we gave them the opportunity to come in and be part of the solution going forward, these guys took that opportunity. And I think that's a really important message too, particularly for the cultures that you lead, is to allow people the opportunity to come in. And yes, they're going to be held accountable, but they can participate in helping clean up that culture. And so from a leadership standpoint, hearing from them is critically important. At the end of the day, there is a huge group of true victims. And those are the people that we're here for at USADA. And those are the ones that we stand up for. And someone asked me, why would you put yourself through this? Congress was going to defund you. You had legislation introduced. You got death threats. Your kids had security taking them to school. Why would you possibly go through that? And the reason we do it, it's not for ourselves. As I told you earlier, if you're in it for yourself, you might as well not be in it. You got to have a mission. You got to have something bigger than yourself when you're confronted with these difficult decisions to adhere to the ethic and the mission that you've sworn to. And why we're here is for clean athletes. And here's one clean athlete that I mentioned earlier that you can hear from just 1 second.
The truth already. You know, the part that you just showed where he was explaining, talking to Luke and what he had to do with his children. My wife called me about 4 months ago and she said when this whole thing was breaking, aren't you glad you're not sitting down with your children tonight and telling them how you had to cheat and lie to win? And the winning at all cost mentality. I think that this really is a story bigger than Lance, it's bigger than cycling. It really goes to the core of ethics matter, doing things the right way matter. And it seems whether it's business, academics, politics, that I think the country's fed up, and hopefully we're seeing a cultural shift that how you do things is more important than the result.
Because I couldn't end it any better than that. How you do things is more important than the end result. Scott Mercier left the sport of cycling because he was unwilling to become the fraud, participate in illegal drug activity like some of those who did. And today, his decision to make the right decision was validated. And if he were here, and I know Scott well, he would tell you, he's the true winner. Even though he doesn't have a yellow jersey that's now been vacated, he's the true winner. With that, a couple quick bullet points. You know vision, mission, values. You guys talk about them here all the time. Your leadership classes, out on the field, you know it. Create the culture. That's where the art in leadership comes in. That distinguishes people. Create the culture. Find ways to create the culture that is in line with your vision, mission, and values. I think you have to increase the benefits of doing it right. You have to increase the benefits of doing it right, and there has to be accountability. And that's the part, most of us don't like confrontation. We want everybody to like us. But you have to have consequences that contain and sustain the culture that you're trying to create. So with that, I think we're going to take a few questions, and thank you for your attention. So I think my understanding is there are a few microphones set up, and I'm happy to field questions if there are any. Now, the Ravens aren't playing tonight on Monday Night Football, so there's no reason to go back to your rooms.
Can you, Sir Midshipman Third Class Gorman, 25th Company. As in like athletes in general, I feel like they constantly want to get better, and as would everybody else. But in terms of supplements, where does your organization draw the line between like a supplement that would increase your performance versus something that Lance Armstrong takes, or how do you regulate that, especially with so much innovation and things in that area, and people creating new supplements all the time? Like, how do you guys monitor that?
Yeah, it's great. Thanks for the question. Really good question. A couple responses. Look, we want to win, right? I mean, we're not here saying we don't want to win. We absolutely want to win, and we want to be competitive. The question is, what's the rule? And sport is really nothing other than an agreed upon set of rules by which all competitors adhere to. And fairness is a critical piece of that. So when you break the rule to gain it, particularly when it gives you an advantage, and make no mistake, the drugs that we're talking about here, EPO, blood transfusions, anabolic steroids, human growth hormone, those are game-changing advantages. You know, EPO, one cyclist, Greg LeMond, said, will turn a donkey into a racehorse. You look at the numbers, you know, I think Lance's first tour was 90, he won, and it was 91 hours, so many minutes, so many seconds, and he was, I don't know, 7 minutes or less in front of the second place finisher. Well, they say, you know, the research that's been done on EPO, for example, is 5 to 15% performance advantage. So you can only imagine after 91 hours, let's say you get a 10% advantage, average it out, you get a 10% advantage. That is and the winner is only about 7 minutes. That is a game-changing advantage. So the question really is, what's the rule? Yes, we want to be competitive. No, and we hate to lose, but we hate to lose to people who cheat us, right? We don't want to lose to cheaters. We want to lose to people who are playing by the rules, and that's still no fun, but we're willing to at least tolerate that. So the second point is what's prohibited, what's not. And it really comes down to 3 criteria, and it can be any of the 3 criteria. Number 1, it enhances performance. Number 2, it endangers or violates health and safety of athletes. Or 3, it violates the spirit of sport, and it can be any combination 2 of those criteria. So when it comes time to supplements, we have a big education component, and I would encourage you, if you're using supplements, if you're an athlete and using supplements, go to supplements411.com, and you'll see our website, and be informed. There are a lot of holes in the regulation. The original federal law that was passed, DSHEA, the Dietary Supplement Health Education Act, was great for 1994 when it was passed, but it's not so great today when 90% of the ingredients are coming from overseas where there's no quality control. We've done studies. You can see on that website I just mentioned, you can see what we call our high-risk list, where we literally will go out and pull supplements off store shelves, or our athletes will disclose to us what supplements they're using, and we'll go and test them. And if they test positive for amphetamines or any of the steroids that I mentioned or any human growth hormones, we'll put that list up on our website so that you know the company, the batch number of those that have tested positive. You just want to be informed. And they offer a big promise, right? For a couple $100 a month, you can live forever with a lot more energy and be able to focus, get stronger, bigger, faster. But the promise is a lot less than how they're being marketed. So what we say is be smart and educate yourself when, you know, if you decide to use those types of products, be educated about it. But in our world, it's not gray. We have a list, and something like creatine is not on the list. Some argue that it should be on the list, but it's not. So it's totally fine if it's otherwise in your best nutritional interest to use creatine, as an example, to use creatine. It's not an anti-doping rule offense. So it's a very rules-based process. All right, other questions?
Sir, Midshipman Third Class Hoffman, I was just wondering, based off the NFL change to blood tests for HGH, what are your thoughts on the use of it in college sports and specifically college football, considering how it doesn't show up in urine tests?
Yeah, I think it's a real problem, to be quite candid. Only because I've been able to sit down with athletes and coaches and hear firsthand the pressures that are put on athletes. And athletes, you know, at the elite level in college, and look, I have young kids that play, you know, 12, 10, and 7, and I see the pressures that their coaches put on them at that young age. I mean, we had a grandparent at my daughter's, when she was 8, her 8-year-old soccer, developmental soccer, they don't even keep score. A grandparent got kicked out of the game, literally a red card, because he was screaming and yelling over a little foul that happened. The pressures at that level and all the way up are huge. So what I say is, when you don't have a mechanism for getting caught, while we want everyone to do the right thing and have hope that they otherwise are going to make the right decision for them, when it's down to a cost-benefit analysis and there's no cost because there's no chance they can get caught, and there's a huge performance benefit, so using human growth hormone when there's no blood test, for example, I think if you're the leader of those sports, I think your head is in the sand, and you're not fulfilling your obligation to ensure fair play, from my perspective.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks for that question. Yeah.
Evening, sir. I'm a huge fan of cycling, so cycling team, let's go.
Clean cycling. You're a huge fan of clean cycling.
I can't answer that question. But, sir, it seems like, you know, the past, I don't know, a lot of Tour de France's, you can't really trust anyone that wins. I mean, does winning the Tour de France or a major Grand Tour automatically put someone on a, you know, they're probably doping list, or can I actually believe anyone that's winning now?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And look, I think you have to give every rider the presumption of innocence. And look, we were the biggest fans and believers in US Postal Service. In my office, literally, I had the poster of Lance riding through the European countryside with the quote, people ask me what I'm on, I'm on my bike busting my rear end 8 hours a day, the Nike ads. A lot of you have probably seen it by now. I think you absolutely have to give them that benefit of the doubt and trust that the anti-doping system is working as well as it is. I think the sport is in a much better spot than it's ever been in. I think there's been a cultural shift, in large part when the head of the sport who creates that culture is removed from office based on his failure to clean up the sport, but also overseeing it during that time period. And don't take my word for it. I mean, we hear from athletes the very same thing, but we also have seen some of the experts around the world. Antonio Veyer out of Europe, who runs power wattages and speed comparisons on hill climbs and those sorts of things based on some of the analytics. He says they're winning, you know, we're winning the battle from that perspective. So I think you gotta believe. I think as a sports fan, all athletes are entitled to that. Trust that we're doing our job, and at the end of the day, I think cycling is miles ahead in giving clean athletes the opportunity that they deserve, and the rules being enforced to provide fair competition than it's ever been.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thanks. What? We are, okay, yep. All right, can I do one more here and then we're done? No? All right. All right, I'll stay around. Sorry, Art.
He's going to announce it. Yeah. They can come on down.
Oh, okay, good.
We're actually going to go on.
So, unfortunately, we're out of time for questions. Let's try to stay after this sounds good. If anyone wants to come down and talk to him and answer any questions that they have. Sir, another one of the sirs. Thank you very much for taking your time out of your busy schedule to come talk to us here in Alumni Hall. We're very appreciative of your time, and moral courage is obviously a big topic about what we preach here at the Naval Academy. So on behalf of the Stockdale Center and the United States Naval Academy, I'd like to present you with a small token of our appreciation.
Hey, thanks, man. It's awesome. Is that good? That's good. Thanks a lot. That's great. That's fantastic. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. That was good.
So, stand by. Attention on deck.
We'll walk out together and then we'll. Sounds great.
Yes, sir. Thank you for your time. Dismissed.